We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Really excited about today's episode, today's guest. We're going to get to that shortly. But first, I want to tell you about a new perk that I have added to the Lions of Liberty Pride. I'm going to try to do this with all of my guests, a bonus segment, maybe 10, 15 minutes, really digging deeper into the topics discussed on that show. So this week with my guest, Joshua Rayner, planned on doing 15 minutes bonus, and we talked for about 35 minutes. So if you want to get that bonus content, all you have to do is join the Lions of Liberty Pride. You can go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty or lionsofliberty.locals.com. Join for as little as $5 a month, and you'll get access to that bonus content. It's really easy to actually add the Patreon bonus feed to your podcast player. You can add it in. So after you listen to today's episode, you can just jump over and listen to that bonus conversation. So please check that out. And of course, last week I had the conversation with the founder of Masa Chips, Stephen Arena, also known as Really Tan Man on Twitter. And we did a bonus segment too, talking about the chip making process and digging deeper into those details. So join the Pride to get that stuff. And also, if you're in the Pride, if you've forgotten, we have a perk for Run Your Mouth Coffee, where you can get 10% off at the $10 and up levels in the Pride. So join the Pride, drink coffee, Run Your Mouth Coffee. It's a company that I founded with my friend Ben Panji. It's awesome coffee. And if you follow us on the social medias, especially on Instagram and Facebook, you'll see that we support free speech, and you're going to agree with basically everything we post. So support like-minded people. Join the Pride and support Run Your Mouth Coffee. That's all I got for today's show. For today's intro, I should say. The show itself is incredible. I'm so excited for you guys to hear this. I've wanted to talk to Joshua for many months now, and definitely turned out great. The interview turned out, even better than I could have expected. So looking forward to hearing the feedback from you all. Let's get into today's show. All right. Well, we are live now to the Lions of Liberty Pride, and I'm joined here today by Joshua Rayner. Joshua is a raw milk propagandist. I'm just going to read his Twitter profile bio, because I think it's pretty cool how he summarizes it. A raw milk propagandist, a regenerative farmer, a ranch butcher, and a sunshine maximalist. He's also the host of a brand new podcast, I think just within this month here. It's called Rainier Radio. Joshua, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. I can't speak. I just got out of like a 3-hour training I did, so I got to gather myself. But thanks for coming on the show, man. I think the first time that I saw you was, if you remember, an appearance you did on the King Pilled podcast.
I do. That was a really fun one.
Yeah. So it was with Matthew Erickson and his co-host at the time, Steven, and you. And I tuned into the live stream, and you all looked exactly the same. You all had those long flowing hair. You all had beards. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? But so people saw you there, and then they see you now.
It seemed like we were like part of some little club or something, which is funny. And now I have a drastic appearance shift. I just shaved my head and face, everything, for the first time in over 10 years this last week. My son just had his first birthday, and I don't know. I was just kind of feeling I needed a break. My son was grabbing on my hair and stuff. And
what was your son's reaction to it?
Honestly, like I had this idea maybe a month or two ago, and I was like, ah, no, you know what? I can't do that because it's gonna freak him out, and I don't want to traumatize him like that. But he looked at me kind of strange and funny and was like, "Who is that?" But then within 20 minutes, he totally forgot about it because I guess I sound and smell the same. And honestly, I wonder that he probably handled it better than he would have if he was a little bit older, maybe. But yeah, I freaked out definitely like my mom quite a bit. But besides it, everything, it's my new normal now. I'm still
Yeah.
having a hard time every time I look in the mirror. I'm like, okay, this is me, I guess.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think it's good in life to have changes like that, either changes to your appearance. And really the only way to do like a drastic, like overnight change to your appearance is like either shaving a beard or cutting your hair, or you can't really like, get in shape and lose 20 pounds overnight. So that's I think it's a healthy thing to do to change things up.
Well, yeah, I
But
mean, like you said, all these things that we do to ourselves are like this thing over time, right? Like I remember when I
mhm,
grew out my hair and I grew out my beard, it was just kind of this like daily patience kind of a thing. And you can't just like, oh, I want long hair now. You have to actually sit there and wait for it to happen. And usually, you kind of, the more you think about it, the longer it takes, right? Like a watch pot never boils sort of thing. And then before you know it, you have long hair and a big beard. And so it is strange. Like you said, it's right. Maybe the only thing that you can do besides maybe like getting a giant face tattoo or something that
right,
you can
Mike
like
Tyson.
instantly change your appearance. um so I'm still like, it's still weird. I am enjoying just like rubbing my fuzzy head and not having to worry about you know deep brushing it in the shower and stuff like that, so it's quite a relief for sure.
That's funny. We were talking pre-show about your new podcast and how I listened to your first episode, episode 0 of Rainier Radio, and you talked pretty much your entire, or seemingly to me, it seemed like your entire journey with diet. And when I say diet, I don't mean like going on a diet. I mean like diet of what you're eating, like in that way. And I want to get into some of that stuff, but I think a good starting point is the pinned post on your Twitter. And I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I'm actually buying my first raw milk tomorrow, which is kind of funny.
Nice.
Took me a while to. I'm in Pennsylvania, and there's crazy laws about raw milk.
Yeah, but you
But
have all the Amish farmers there, so
that's
there's
true.
a lot of good raw milk in Pennsylvania. Honestly, some of the best pasture
Really.
if people take care of it. So there's some really good quality stuff there.
Well, that's good to know. So yeah, I'm first going down that path, and your pinned tweet is talking about how lactose intolerance is bullshit, and I think it's a really cool, informative thread. I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that and expand on it to start with.
Sure. So there's this, I wouldn't well, yes, like a misconception, but just kind of the way that we frame things usually is kind of missing the mark, or it's reductionist. And so we have identified that there is a sugar in milk called lactose, and that some people produce more lactase endogenously, which is the enzyme that breaks down lactose in their body.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a genetic component to this, right? Like the actual peoples who started um, keeping animals for milk. And so, I could go down a whole kind of history thing, but to kind of, try to simplify it as much as possible. Yeah. So some people do have a better innate ability to deal with lactose. But
Mm-hmm.
also, when we talk about innate, we think of this as this is a genetic um, blanket, right? So you either had this thing and it was sort of in you from before you existed, or you didn't have this thing, as opposed to like the state of your being, right? Like you as an individual are a person in this moment who may or may not have a certain amount of the lactase enzyme in their body.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, raw milk, right, which means unpasteurized, unhomogenized, is milk that hasn't had this heat applied to it artificially. So the milk comes out of a cow's udder at around like 101, 102 degrees, which is the cow's body temperature. And in this state, the milk has certain properties. It has certain vitamins, it has certain minerals, it has enzymes, bacteria that make up this kind of natural or even like virgin state of milk. And when you apply heat to it, which is, pasteurization, sometimes it's as low as 140 degrees, sometimes it's more like full boiling, 212 degrees. You are going to denature and alter the entire composition of this. The
You're
Weston
going
A.
to kill all of the bacteria, right? You're
Right.
killing
Well,
all the bacteria.
that's why they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
Pasteurization comes from Louis Pasteur,
Yeah.
right? And so that is basically applying his principles to health, and that sort of goes along with this, very convoluted, germ theory of disease, and we could spend hours and hours talking about that.
Well, it's funny because I actually talked about this with my guest last week. About pasteurization, about Louis Pasteur, and the reason why it started, because they brought the cows into cities and they were feeding the cows like literal garbage and just like waste from distilleries and stuff like that. And these cows got diseased, and that caused people to get sick and die. And instead of saying, "Oh, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't bring these cows into cities and feed them garbage," they just said, "Oh, we'll just boil all the milk and kill everything in it."
Yeah,
Essentially.
if you look at a lot of people will show kind of graphs of different rates of diseases and just all kinds of
Mhm.
problems. And all of these graphs start sometime after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And so what they show is that they're essentially saying before there were all these problems, and then now due to technology and all these, whether it be vaccines or some type of intervention, we have reduced the cause of disease. So like, hooray, science and medicine. But of course, that only starts at a certain time. It's not like going back to time immemorial. It's just like, well, it's like 200 years ago.
Mhm.
So once we started developing these types of modern cities, Industrial Revolution, things got way worse because we didn't really know what we were doing, and you know, putting people and animals too close together. Yeah, bad quality food, and so then all these things got really bad, and then they implemented these things, and then they go, oh look, they got better. These things saved, as if like the natural
Mhm.
state of milk or disease was this terrible thing, as
Right.
opposed to just you kind of undid the problem that you created, but you didn't actually undo it. You just went around it, so it looks like you solved the problem.
And
Um,
created other problems by
right.
solving the
So if
problem.
you can look at charts of all these different quote unquote infectious diseases, and then say, oh look, like the vaccine and was introduced, and now all these diseases, they don't really exist very much anymore. But you actually look at it, and it's like, well, most of these vaccines were introduced after the massive decline in the rates of said disease, and then you're
Mhm.
also discounting like um, all kind of hygiene, water, sanitation, all these different changes that happen at the same time. So going back to the raw milk thing, um, the Weston A. Price Foundation has done really incredible work on this. They run a website called realmilk.com, and you can find all these old articles, and there's one that has all these like electron microscope shots of different types of milk. And if you look at just pure raw milk fresh, it very much resembles like blood, right? And so there's
Mm.
actually this saying that like milk basically is blood without like the red blood cells. And so then when you pasteurize it, you look at these pasteurized, homogenized, this, ultra high temp pasteurized, this thing, that thing, you've kind of like obliterated the cell structure of the milk. You've destroyed all the bacteria, you've destroyed the enzymes. And so when you're thinking of raw milk in particular, you're thinking of this kind of, it's really like a living, uh, almost organism as a food. And it has a microbiome to it. And a
Mhm.
microbiome is basically like this ecosystem, right? That's what like a biome is. And it by being an ecosystem, it already has self-regulation in place. So when you there really in nature, there's no such thing as a sterile environment. If you sterilize something, whether you use, heat or chemicals, it is sterile in that moment, but other things will find, it's like a vacuum. It will always be filled.
Right.
And so I posted this picture maybe some months ago, and I got it from Weston A. Price, where it showed they left a bunch of different kinds of milk out in jars open on the counter over, I don't know, a number of weeks or something. And the most processed and pasteurized milk started to putrefy and get all kinds of weird bacterial things going on in there, whereas the raw milk maintained its bacterial environment, its biome. Because most antibiotic, right? Think about what penicillin is. It's bacteria. Antibiotics are bacterial based. It's like introducing a predator to regulate a species in the wild. And so these
Yeah,
bacteria are
you just look at the word itself, antibiotics. So it's
right.
antibacteria. Conversely, probiotics are, they are probacteria. They
Right.
are forming more bacteria, right?
But it's very much a misnomer because they're both just, for the most part, bacteria. Antibiotics are bacterial based and probiotics are bacterial based. And
Mhm.
so it's just this kind of weird, like there's a very, very big misunderstanding of really how bacteria work. And so, you're basically introducing within the raw milk, you basically have like a defense army, right? And the
Mhm.
bacteria are just people of your army. And
Yeah.
then they're fighting against all these other peoples of like invading, bands and tribes coming. And if you just were to like just nuke the whole thing, just kill everyone, kill all of the people on your side, kill the invaders,
Yeah.
you might have this just empty, landscape for a while until some new nomadic people came and found it and then would like set up shop. So whenever you are destroying bacteria, you always have to be careful of what can then take its place. And so in raw milk, there's people are probably familiar with lactobacillus bacteria.
Mhm.
And these bacteria actually produce lactase themselves, and they can break down lactose, which is why something like yogurt is very well tolerated by many people who can't digest milk, usually pasteurized milk, because the bacteria have already begun this process of breaking down the lactose. If you look at the thing of yogurt and it says all these strains, L. acidophilus, which is Lactobacillus acidophilus,
Mhm.
L. bulgaris, all these types. Um, and so by consuming, many people can develop a higher endogenous lactase production by eating lots of yogurt. So if they can't digest milk, they can eat lots of yogurt and then can digest milk. Or conversely, you can drink raw milk, which has those bacteria in them as well, but they're not quite as far along in the process. And as you can, like, I think it's referred to in like some other concepts like exposure theory. I'm pretty sure I've heard
When
like
you say they're not quite as far along in the process, you mean they're not as numerous, or they're not as like
well, so
resilient, or
in the yogurt, right, this fermentation is bacteria breaking down sugar, right?
Mhm.
And then as a byproduct, it produces, alcohol. Um, and so raw milk is not fermented yet, but if you leave it, if you can, I've made yogurt and cheeses by just, leaving. People who grew up in, maybe a more rural life might be familiar with clabbered
Mhm.
milk, which you just leave the milk on the jar in a cupboard and it starts to curdle and ferment and starts to break down. So the something like yogurt or cheese is just, it's already done that. Whereas milk hasn't done that yet. But by drinking it and just exposing yourself to milk in general, I've even heard of people just who drink pasteurized milk, who by just continually drinking milk improve their ability to digest milk, because you are upregulating enzymes in the body signaling,
Mhm.
hey, we are getting this thing coming in, so we are going to try to produce more of this thing. But just drinking raw milk itself makes that process a lot easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're creating the diversity in your gut to be able to digest it, right?
Yeah.
To a certain
Yeah,
extent.
because the lactase is produced in the gut by bacteria.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. I did get a couple comments here. I want to show this one because it kind of leads into my next question. So Stephen Ellis, well, definitely not Stephen Ellis, Mr. Mark Zuckerberg, says raw goat's milk from a localish Amish community is the best I've ever had. I think I saw you tweet out a couple weeks ago about sheep's milk. So could you talk about maybe some of the different benefits between like cow's milk compared to goats and sheep's milk?
So in that thread, I linked to, I briefly mentioned A2 milk, and I also linked to another thread I did entirely about A2 milk. And so this refers to the type of casein proteins in the milk. So a lot of people, if you've been into fitness, everyone knows what whey protein is, right? As a
Hmm.
supplement. And there's also, which is a lot less well known, there's casein protein. And they're both milk derived. And, if you remember Little Miss Muffet, right? It's Little Miss Muffet sat in her tuffet eating her curds and whey. So if you take a jar of raw milk and you leave it on the counter, it will start to separate and curdle, creating cheese curds, and then this clear liquid, which is the whey. And so, whey is a byproduct of cheese making, which is why they had all this extra whey. And they're like, what do we do with this? It turns out it has all these really good properties for muscle building. Let's sell it as a supplement. So there also is casein, which in the bodybuilding community is kind of viewed as more as this slower digesting protein. So in
Hmm.
traditional bodybuilding kind of methodology, you would drink whey, right after a workout to immediately get protein in this, quote unquote, anabolic window. And then casein is something that you would eat right before bed. That way you would continuously be getting a slow flow of protein and amino acids into the system.
Okay.
So there's, I'm not certainly not like a molecular biologist or anything. This is just my my quote unquote doing my research. Um, and so in the protein itself, there's these chains of amino acids, and there's a they call it beta casein chain. And in a certain position of this chain of amino acids, they are in a very specific order. There is an A1 milk, which is, if milk isn't labeled as such, and from it's a cow, it's going to be A1, which was a mutation that coincided with the breeding of cows for milk production. So A1 sort of is correlated with a higher overall milk production of the milk. And so, people who
Mm.
were breeding cows for milk were like, more milk, that means more better, right? And so it started to change the actual property of the milk. And so in A1 milk, in this specific position, is the amino acid histidine. And histidine breaks down into histamine, which can cause a number of allergic reactions. Everyone's very familiar with histamine, probably.
Right.
And also this beta casein morphine 7. There's a bunch of different types of beta casein morphines. I'm not super, well versed on all of them, but the word morphine in his name is sort of this like opioid receptor type thing, and
Mm.
that itself can cause a lot of health issues as well. Can be harder to break down. And so for a lot of people who can't they say they can't digest cow's milk, they can digest goat milk, no problem. Goat milk is really the only other easily available milk you can get in stores besides cow milk. Now, all goat milk, all sheep milk, all horse milk, all camel milk, all water buffalo milk, human milk, donkey milk, whatever
Hmm.
it is, those are all A2. And only there's also A2 cow's milk, which you have to do genetic testing and then purposefully breed for those characteristics. And so that is going to have this different profile. And so a lot of people, there's other differences between different animal milks, but a lot of people who have this A1 issue do not have problems with A2 milk. A farmer that I used to work for, he did raw milk, and he had 3 sons, but one of them still couldn't digest the raw milk where all of the rest of his, family could. And so he started learning about A2 milk. And then, so his son never had problems with raw A2 milk, but he did have problems with raw A1 milk. So
Interesting.
if you there like I said, there are other properties, and there are some people out there who feel that that aside, goat milk is quote unquote healthier or better, and there may or may not be something to that. I think it's really just an individual difference kind of thing. But my favorite milk is sheep milk. Sheep milk is of course also A2. It has about double the protein and fat of something like cow's
Oh.
milk. So
Huh.
when you remember, you like, there's the classic thing. I'm pretty sure this happened to like everyone in our generation. I'm assuming you're like a millennial. Um,
Yeah.
and pretty much I think it's probably started with us just as people got more removed from things. And so everyone knows that there's such a thing as whole milk, and then there's like 2% milk. And they think that whole milk is 100%. And then
All the way from 100 down to 2%. Pretty
right,
big gap.
but like, conventional whole milk is just like 3.5%, right? So
Mhm.
they just reduced the amount of fat content in it from, okay, by volume it was 3.5% down to 2% or 1%, or the non-fat milk. But if you get a uh, grass-fed, pasture-raised Jersey cow on like a really good farm, that milk is probably closer to 5, 7, 8, 8%. Um, and goat milk, I believe, is around 7 or 8, and I think sheep milk is like closer to 10.
Wow.
Um, so depending on like what version of cow's milk you're talking about, it can be about double the fat, and it has like just various different nutritional profiles. I think I'm sure it's higher in potassium. I know because I looked it up specifically. I honestly, I'm just kind of a fan of all the milks. Um, and the more that I consumed, lots of raw A2 cow's milk, raw goat milk, raw sheep milk. I've had camel milk. I've had water buffalo milk. I've had human milk. I can pretty much digest any form of milk now. Whereas before I could not, just eat willy nilly, whether it be something like cheese at a restaurant or even just milk from the store. I can
Mhm.
now go to the store and buy like whatever milk and digest it. Though I still try to avoid doing that because if I can get as much raw milk as possible. I've noticed that just consuming this huge variety of milk has made my system a lot more resilient and just better able to digest all the different forms of dairy.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to trying it and incorporating it and like, being consistent with it and seeing the changes that happen.
Yeah, I mean
But
it's a really nutritionally dense source, food source. Like it's
Mhm.
people's basically lived off of nothing but various dairy products, right? A lot of these cultures, they would have all different kinds of yogurts and cheeses and alcoholic beverages made from milk. I have a thread on Mongolian dairy. They have like fermented alcoholic horse milk. They have a yak milk vodka.
Mm.
It's a very versatile food, and it's like I said, it's very dense in a lot of nutrients. Everyone knows about calcium in milk, but if you don't consume dairy, there really aren't a lot of good sources of calcium. Like you're pretty much just kind of left to, if you've ever heard of like the eggshell thing, you can grind and boil the eggshells as like a calcium supplement in a
Oh, wow.
sense. But otherwise, you're kind of dependent on something like spinach for calcium, which is not really a good form for your body, anyways. And
Probably need a
you need
ton
to
of
eat
it
a
to get,
ton of
yeah,
it. Whereas
yeah.
you could just drink a glass of milk and eat some cheese here and there, and your health will be a lot better off for it.
Yeah. So I was talking earlier about your, initial episode 0 podcast where you went through your entire, really your, I hate using the word like journey, health journey, but I guess that's what it is.
Yeah.
So in addition to, raw milk and all that stuff, you've gone through a period of time, and I don't know if you still are now, where you were eating raw meat, right? And I think you said you started that back in 2013, I believe. So I'm just curious if you could talk about what led you to that, and really your journey through that part of your life.
Yeah. So, I started working out at a young age, like 11, 12 years old, doing push-ups and sit-ups at every commercial break while I was watching TV. Started going to the gym with my dad, and I played a lot of sports. And so, you get to high school, hitting the weight room for football and stuff.
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden, like what you're eating, you're not just like, I'm hungry, I'm just eating food. You're kind of like, I'm
Yeah.
trying to do something. It really was just like, how do I get huge? Protein powder, pasta, lots of meat and just like everything. And when I got into college, I started really just kind of going a lot more into it and trying to learn more, reading blogs. And I started doing CrossFit back in 2011. And most people might know that paleo is like really big into CrossFit, right? It's this kind of like, oh, CrossFit is like the way that and obviously it's nonsense, but like that our ancestors might have like exercised as if they like actually exercise like that. Um, but it sort of, regardless of what you think on like that kind of approach to things, it brought up this evolutionary perspective, which looked at food as a supposed to, right? Like, what are we supposed to eat? And I was like, oh shit, that sounds really interesting, as
Hmm.
opposed to just food being this just like food is food, there's different foods that are better or worse for us. And it's not just as simple as like, oh, like McDonald's is bad and then something that's like homemade is good. But like why? What
Hmm.
differentiates all these different foods? And so the paleo thing tends to really have a lot of keto, low carb stuff to it. Very meat heavy, but kind of avoiding like, oh, sugar is just the devil. And so, I mentioned it in that video, but like I literally wouldn't eat a carrot because it had too many carbs, kind of a thing. Like that level of
Yeah.
retardation with like taking a diet that you don't really understand. Just being like, yeah, I'm gonna do this thing. That was honestly like really just dumb. I think I did a lot of damage to myself being in college, partying. So of course, like drinking alcohol and all these things, which of course do have carbs and sugar in them.
Hmm.
But eating low carb, training a lot, like I said, drinking a lot, not sleeping, intermittent fasting, you're just compiling all of this stress on the system. And when I got out of school, I was thinking like, okay, I really want to like kind of rein this in and do something a lot more intentional and well thought out. And my the CrossFit gym I was working at, my boss he was drinking raw milk. And he started kind of telling me about it because, in paleo, like dairy's kind of hit or miss, but for a lot of people, like, oh, dairy's not good. You can't digest dairy. And I was like, yeah, man, I got diarrhea when I have dairy. That makes sense. Totally. Yeah, of course. And so he's the one who first told me about Amos Miller, who's the Amish farm in Pennsylvania. If you ever have the chance to go out there and check it out, I would highly recommend it. I've never been there. But so I started ordering food from this Amish farm back in 2013. And so I was getting raw milk and getting various meats and getting, I started hearing about like, oh, liver, you should eat liver. And I was like, I didn't even know people ate liver. Sure. And started just getting like weird with it, so to speak. And I don't know what compelled me to eat it raw. I don't know if it was something that I read or someone told me about it, but I think along with the raw milk thing and what I was talking to my boss at the time, there was this like, oh, this is like these raw foods are really potent, whatever that means. And so I started getting this raw liver and, I'd put a little like lemon juice on it and it was really gross, but I was just like, all right, I'll do that. And, I had kind of just had this inkling to want to eat like, I had started eating some tartare just at restaurants. I was like, that sounds
Hmm.
really good. And so I just started eating that stuff, just kind of on a whim. And I felt like I really enjoyed eating it. So I find tartare to be delicious. And I found these raw meats to be really easily digestible. Obviously, like, sushi is very common thing that people eat. And I was like, yeah, man, I
Hmm.
love sushi. There's something about this cold, almost like crisp texture before you kind of cook something and it kind of softens up and changes a little bit. And so I just kind of started experimenting with all these various foods, simultaneously really putting a lot more emphasis on my training, eating a lot more carbs and kind of focusing more on like, okay, making sure I fuel my training properly. Okay, how do I tweak my nutrition to get the body composition that I desire? To want to put on muscle? Do I want to burn fat? And in that sphere, because I was doing CrossFit, I was competing in strongman, training powerlifting and all these things, doing some bodybuilding. Everyone kind of in my like adjacency is sort of trying to do these same things. And so you see a lot of people who like start eating these very fake foods to make them fit their macros. Some people have probably heard like the kind of saying, if it fits your macros, basically mean you can eat whatever you want as long as it fits your macros, which
Hmm.
means, are you eating the right amount of protein, fat, and carbs in a day? If you do that, that'll control for your calories. But I also had this like, man, there's this quality thing is really important. So like eating mostly like grass-fed meat and good sources of carbs, rice, potatoes, things like that. And I would still, eat whatever I wanted from time to time. Um, but this quality thing was always this really big push. It was almost this like deep-seated like religious fervor.
Mm.
And but I left a lot of flexibility, to eat out with my friends and things like that. And I would notice these like certain shifts when I would eat better or worse and how I was feeling. And not just in the way that I looked, a lot of people just use that as the sole metric. But I'm like, no, I mean, yeah, I look good, but why do I feel better this time than other time? And so I kind
I
of,
think that that's honestly like the most important thing to like you're fueling your body. You should look at how did that make me feel? I ate a whole pizza. How do I feel? I ate some clean protein. Oh, I feel much better. People don't think about food that way for some reason that
Well,
often.
it's because everyone, I think the main thing is because most people are so out of shape that,
Hmm.
and yes, they're also unhealthy, but they look at themselves in the mirror and they go, oh man, I'm fat or I'm skinny and I don't look good and I want to change this. That's not a bad thing to be like, oh, I don't feel like my body represents a good picture of health.
Hmm.
But they don't actually focus on the health. They just focus on the picture.
Yeah.
And so that's how you get to people who like, yeah, might have a good amount of muscle and might be really lean, but they're not very healthy or that their skin looks really bad.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's good to have that concept of the image in play because I do think a healthy body creates a beautiful body. But if you make that like what you should seek health in general, and then the aesthetics will come as a byproduct of that.
Hmm.
And as you get closer to health, you can fine tune that if you want to put a little bit more emphasis on the aesthetics. And a lot of people are driven to health by first putting the emphasis on the aesthetics, but then it's really easy to get lost in it. And I'd kind of just stayed in this kind of similar, tracking my macros, eating high carbs because I understood its importance in training and performance. Because of course, like if I didn't eat carbs, my performance suffered. It's like, okay, that's a signal back to my body that I need to eat these carbs, while keeping quality in check. And I kind of stayed there until about like 2019 when, this carnivore thing had gotten just really popular. It was all over Joe Rogan and everyone was doing it. You hear Sean Baker and Jordan Peterson's doing it. And for some reason, I'd always had this kind of like some, intestinal distress that I was trying to solve. And I didn't really think about changing my diet too much because I was like, well, this is like working okay. But then I was like, I don't want just okay. I want to feel better. I noticeably have something about my body that I don't feel great about. So I want to change this. And so I finally decided to just kind of dive into the carnivore thing at the end of 2019. Um, and it felt great. I did it and I felt great, man. Those first couple weeks, those first few months, just like, the biggest thing is that when I did that, the quality of my diet, which had always been pretty good, had just never been better because I was like, okay, I'm
Hmm.
going to be eating nothing but, meat and some eggs and maybe a little bit of dairy. And I'm going to, cook everything at home. So I'm not getting all these weird oils in there.
Yeah.
And I was already at a lean state. I was in great shape, but I lost like a couple pounds and I no longer had to really track anything. I noticed my digestion was flowing really well. I did not feel bloated at all. And I didn't have to track anything and my weight just stayed. I just was like, man, I just listened to my hunger cravings. This is the place to be, man. I am natural. I am a primal caveman listening to my instincts. This is the thing.
Yeah.
And it was great until it wasn't, you know,
Hmm.
that clarity of the digestion, not having this other foods that can like ferment in your system. And then I started to kind of feel like, man, I really need carbs. I can tell my energy's tank, my performance, like, oh yeah, you wait a little bit and then you get keto adapted. And I was just like, man, this is just, I am not feeling so good. And so
Not to go off topic here, but just to get your opinion, isn't it interesting, or do you think that some people maybe are just based on their makeup are just more able to go carnivore or something like that? Because there's definitely people that seem to be doing very well with only eating meat. Maybe their bodies just don't need fiber for some reason. Um,
so I mean, I'm not a huge fan of fiber, but what I will say is I think this, like I said, the state of a person as an individual in this moment will
mhm.
dictate. I mean, I think I literally just tweeted last night, like your ability to digest a food is predicated on foods you've eaten days or weeks prior.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so your ability, like you at this exact second, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you're listening to this thing, you are the product of however long you think that life exists and how it got here. Everything that you've done in your life, everything that your ancestors did, and everything has, this is a pinnacle of this moment.
Mhm.
And so every single one of those things, your genetics, the environment of every single one of your ancestors, your entire life, everything you've ever done right here culminates right now. That will dictate how anything you do affects you, right? Whether you want to call it genetics, epigenetics, you're setting the stage
Mhm.
for how things affect you. And so, a lot of people through this kind of paleo-ish, keto-ish, low carb thing, which has really kind of taken over the mainstream fitness trends of the last decade or two, kind of alongside with veganism, though, oddly enough. Um, it's just a given that sugar is bad, that carbs are bad. And so what some people will say is, oh, you can handle carbs because like you're healthy enough to, or you're active enough to. And this guy who I think does a really good job with content, his name's Kyle Mamunis. He has a YouTube channel called Nutrichronology, so like nutrition and endocrinology put together, put a little portmanteau,
Mm.
where he says you actually have to be healthy enough to do a low carb diet. If you are really robust, just like
That's interesting.
if you thrive on veganism, that's not because you were vegan your whole life and your ancestors were vegan, because that person doesn't exist, because it's not
Yeah.
possible. Um, if you thrive on veganism, man, your grandparents probably ate a shit ton of butter and meat and lived on a farm or something, and you had incredible genetics or inherited nutrition.
Mhm.
Um, and so you can, all of these diets which cut things out do have benefits by cutting those things out, but they have drawbacks from cutting out other things that you do want.
Yeah.
And so for you to quote unquote thrive on them, really you are getting by with an overly restrictive diet based on, just basically think about like if you had like a bajillion dollars and you had this like huge waste of money thing, it might not
Mhm.
affect you as someone who's like really poor. So you have this nutritional wealth to your
Yeah.
system. And so the way that this guy Kyle framed it is like, the healthier you are, the longer you can get by on a low carb diet or like a carnivore diet. And yes, people are thriving. Like I said, I felt amazing because I was cutting out things which were causing me problems. And oftentimes a lot of it is really like a band-aid, right? Like if you have a leak in your boat and you're like, you pull your boat, out of the water and put it in your garage. You're like, my boat stopped leaking. It's like, no, you just stopped putting water
Yeah.
on it, right? So if you put the second you put it back on the water, you didn't patch the leak, it's going to leak again. And
Right.
so that's what a lot of people are doing with these elimination diets like carnivore, is they're just getting rid of everything that bothers the system, whether that be an irritation or, their body is bad at like handling glucose. And they go, man, I like solved my problem. It's like, no, you just got rid of the situation where the problem arises. And the second that you go back, if you ever want to use your boat again, otherwise,
Mhm.
like, yeah, great boat you got in the garage, man. Like, I don't, what is that good for?
Right.
Um, and so with the carnivore thing, I always try to express as to people that this is a temporary elimination diet. This might give you better clarity on what foods are bothering you. And you might be clearing out a bunch of other inflammatory foods. But at some point, you have to come back to like reality and actually solve the problem. Because if you do this for a long period of time, you're likely going to create some bad problems and potentially be worse off than where you started, which personally I feel like is kind of what happened with myself. Going from carnivore and then going into this primal diet, which is an entirely raw diet, which cuts out salt, which, like all of your food is cold. Um, I feel like all of that really hampered my system. Like I feel like it slowed
How
down
long did you do that
the
primal
primal.
raw diet for? Yeah.
Um, I would say like 100%, well, like, 99% strict around like 10 months.
Yeah.
Um, and like I said, again, I feel great at the beginning of these things. And usually that thing is I have clarity of my gut. I just have this, I'm not bloated, which if you've ever like dealt with bloat or any kind of weird intestinal distress, where you've been
Mhm.
constipated, diarrhea or something like that, if that's gone for like a week or two, you're in heaven.
Mhm.
You've all of a sudden just relieved this huge strain on the system that's really like bothersome, cumbersome, irritating, very distracting. And so I was feeling really, really, really good. And then I started to feel worse before I could realize it. And I think a lot of that is based on what I was doing. Yeah, I was giving myself like these really rich, nourishing foods, but I wasn't giving my system other things that it needed. And I personally don't think a huge problem is of it being raw. Like I think raw meat is safe to eat. Um, I think there's potential an element of the fact that all of the food you're eating is cold, and we might need some more warmer foods. If you get into Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic Indian stuff, they talk about this like digestive fire. And if you
Mhm.
keep putting cold on the fire and not the right foods to stoke the fire, your digestion will actually get weaker. And I think, and a big part of that is the primal diet. You don't eat salt on the primal diet. And the idea is that it's like this unnatural food. It's in this rock form. You should get your sodium from blood or celery juice. Um, and salt is sodium chloride, and your stomach acid is hydrochloric acid. And so your body needs that chlorine from somewhere to develop this strong stomach acid. And so at some point, I just started to get, my energy got worse and my digestion got worse. And I started just being nauseous and couldn't really get down food until I eventually, I don't really know what caused it. I mentioned in that video, but I got a bunch of bug bites, and then I got this weird rash, and then I got what ended up, being sort of guessed at by a doctor as being meningitis, viral meningitis. Talking to someone since then, they said it could have been like West Nile virus, because I literally got like hundreds of mosquito bites this one night sitting by
Wow.
the fire at a marsh. So I don't know what caused that problem. I got really sick. I was like bedridden for multiple weeks, and it was like months long recovery. And I was just going to eat whatever I could to sort of get my strength back. And it was a lot of soup and salt, warm food,
Mhm.
salt. And I think what all of this, to kind of maybe sum all this up, I was in search of this religious kind of zealous purity of diet. I think I have this kind of innate, like, I don't know, quest for this like supreme good. And you think that if you you'll reach this like state of whatever you want to call it, nirvana, heaven, I don't know. I'm sure every single ideology and religion has some like term for this, just like
Mhm.
perfect state or something like that. And so that's why I was really drawn to like extremely strict diets, because I can adhere to anything like that. I have really strong willpower with that. And I don't think that being strict is the bad thing, but I think was I set my emphasis on that, as opposed to what will the diet actually do for my life, as opposed to the diet within itself being the thing to
Mm.
strive to. Switching the focus to what do I want to accomplish in my life, and I'll have the diet support that. And ever since I sort of like really started to kind of switch that mindset around, just like I was doing before, is like I'll eat anything if I believe it'll make me healthier. Which is why I was able to eat, brains and balls and rotten liver and all these kind of weird things, because I was like, I don't care. Some of the foods are actually surprisingly good, but I don't care if it's not that enjoyable. If it'll make me feel better, I'll do it because I want to feel better. Um, and so yeah, now I'm just like way more open minded. And I think that there's a lot of ways to get to where you want to go. I still firmly believe that animal based foods play an integral role in getting there. If you want to go a vegetarian or vegan route, you're just making your things so unnecessarily hard for you. Um, and I don't fear sugar. I think sugar is an incredible fuel source for the body. I eat lots of fruit, juices, milk, honey, maple syrup, actual cane sugar, um, and lots of salt. Man, I eat so much salt. It's funny that I ended up doing a no salt thing when I had always just been a huge craver of salt my whole life.
Yeah.
I love
Salt's amazing.
so I love salty foods, and
Yeah.
I loved the sweets, like the maybe you can help me here, or anyone. I've been trying to describe this definition of how I crave sweets. I never liked the
Mhm.
fruity snacks. I wasn't into Skittles and Starburst and fruit roll-ups. I like, chocolate bars, Snickers, ice cream, cookies. So there's this element to kind of the more, I don't know, earthier, nuttier something, coffee, chocolate, nutty kind of aspect to the sweet foods. I love ice cream. I love gingerbread cookies and chocolate chip cookies and those kinds of things.
I think that's probably more traditional craving of sweets and not so much the I think there's been our palates have been hijacked by these hyper palatable, you know, like fruit roll-ups and high fructose corn syrup that's in sodas and all this stuff. I think what you're talking about is really how I crave sweets too. It's just more like really satiated sweets, you know, that it just I don't know.
It's like
Yeah, chocolate and ice
yeah, it's
cream.
a,
Yeah.
well, I guess it's, it's fat with the sweet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cacao butter, right? Which is the
Mhm.
thing around the cocoa that we eat. That is just pure like saturated fat. It's one of the best things you could eat. Um, and yeah, so I'm really just kind of into I feel like, obviously, like this should make sense. I'm just looking to make myself feel good and being able to accomplish more in my life, things that make me feel better, work better, think better, just experience the world and life in a more full and enjoyable way.
Yeah, and this is one more question I wanted to ask you here before we go into the bonus, and then in the bonus, I'm going to ask you about your experience eating, you know, bull's testicles and brains and all that stuff. Um, Not exclusively. I got another question for you, but so I forget where I heard you talk about this, but it really resonated with me. Where you always hear people say, not always, but there's definitely a sect of people or people on the internet, people on Twitter who say we need to eat more like our ancestors ate. We need to have the diet of our ancestors. And I used to and still kind of sort of think that way, but I've kind of evolved in my thinking because our experience today is so different. There's different, you know, pollution and toxins and stresses and sleep and, you know, everything's different. It's a different world. I just want to get your thoughts on that dynamic to diet.
Well, there's this really big push, which is very understandable, with the whole like return meme, right?
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I think our modern society has gotten very lost. We are very detached from where we came from, the way that we used to do things, both like maybe in a specific sense of like what your own specific ancestors might have done not that long ago. And then also maybe like let's call it like the constraints that all people had before certain
Hmm.
types of technology, and then in a globalized world where everyone is now using the same technology from the exact same producer or whatever you want to call it. And so just like with anything that could be considered maybe even politically right leaning or conservative, you're not trying to live forever in a past sense. And if you are, I think you're going to find out that you're going to fail because time always does move forward.
Right.
But like not like in this like weird progressive sense where we just need to change everything, but it's let's look to the past to best inform our future. And when it comes to diet, I think we can look at these traditional foods and go, why did these people make these foods? How did they make them? What does that do to the food? What is the nutritional composition of it? Hey, did you actually know that these foods have to be combined together to like work? Um, for a lot of people might realize that like as a country, the United States is pretty much just eats corn in various forms, right? Like corn syrup isn't everything, corn starch isn't
Yeah.
everything, corn chips, everything has corn in it somehow. And before we
The
started
corn
doing all this
lobby
stuff,
is strong.
it is very strong. And traditionally, what the natives in the Americas did, because they had a lot of corn here, was they did something called nixtamalization, which is where they mix the corn with mineral lime. And that, I forget the exact mechanism that it does it, but if you don't do that, you will develop B vitamin deficiencies. And so I think the mineral lime deactivates or neutralizes some type of thing which will deplete B vitamins in your system, or it'll allow you to extract more B vitamins from the corn. I forget exactly,
I'm
but
pretty sure that my guest last week was the founder of, I don't know if you heard of this company, Masa Tortilla
oh yeah,
Chips.
I know that guy.
Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
And well, their big selling point is that they're fried in grass-fed beef tallow, no seed oils, but also I believe they have that nixtamalization where, I don't know, you just explained it.
Yeah,
I don't know
so
anything about it.
there are a number of chips on the market now which use nixtamalized corn, but they all
Mhm.
use high oleic sunflower oil, which is still not great. But just using that as an example that like you can't go like let's say you are descendant from like the Aztecs or some Native American tribe, like that's a big part
Mhm.
of your population, and you go, I want to eat like my ancestors, so I'm going to eat Doritos. That's corn. I'm going to drink soda with high fructose corn syrup. It's like no, and not just eating like corn on the cob, but corn produced in a certain way for a certain reason.
Mhm.
So that's where I think this really strong and important element of anything ancestral comes from is understanding how and why they did things. And then using that to adapt to the world that we live in now. Like one of the things that I've kind of been harping on more lately is like you can't ancestral your way out of the industrial revolution, right? Even if you wanted to
Mhm.
go full Ted Kaczynski and destroy the industrial world, you'd have to use technology to like nuke everything to then reset it.
Right.
So like I think there's a lot of power in eating raw meat, and I think you should do it. Yeah, eat raw liver, eat, drink raw milk, do these things, and understand that that is not going to be what beats against an enemy, if we want to call like the modern world and environment an enemy that
Yeah.
has modern technology and weaponry. So, I will just like kind of like I would eat any food source. I will at this point I'm kind of a lot more open to doing or taking or supplements or whatever it is that is out there. But again, that is done in a certain way. Like you can get if you go to the your local health food store and you go into the little supplement section and you pick up a bottle of whatever, you'll
Mhm.
see whatever the active ingredient is, and then you'll see a couple fillers and you'll see like silica and titanium dioxide, and you might not think anything of it, but then you find out that silica is basically just like effectively powdered glass that is going to
Yeah.
be ripping up your insides. And so if you want to get the supplement, make it as not bad as possible,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So look towards whatever we have from the past, like use that knowledge, right? All of human existence, you know, maybe absent from these, if you're into the whole like Graham Hancock thing, like these various technological resets, it's kind of like your ancestors said, like, eat that mushroom, not that mushroom, right? Like you've seen that meme
Mhm.
where it's like you're out there and one mushroom is food, the other one will kill you, and the other one will send you in outer space, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, who's going to go out there and try them? Someone had to try them and report back what they did. And so you never want to like get rid of previous knowledge. But like, are you trying to, again, just like me sort of seeking this like perfectly pure diet, are you trying to live exactly like model a perfect life of your ancestors, whatever that means? Like which ancestors, which specific ancestor, like how does one do such a thing?
Yeah.
But rather take what might have been, if you believe in, I mean, I guess at this point, there's probably various theories on how evolution works. But if you do believe that, at least within the last so many generations, what your ancestors did affected who you are biologically, or, what you're quote unquote meant to do, then use that as to inform who you as an individual are, because you aren't your ancestors, you are your own person. Just like I said, this
Mhm.
is a culmination of all of whatever history is, however long it is, however it is we got here, through whatever process, to you as an individual now in this exact moment. And what is right for you in this moment is not what one of your ancestors did like 17 generations ago, right? It's this amalgamation of everything. Then recognizing that we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a modern world with, weird ingredients in our foods, with, poison in our water, in our air, in our food, EMFs, whatever, like your ancestors didn't have like a cell phone in their pocket, right?
Yeah.
And so I
Mhm.
don't know if there's an ancestral tool that like deals with cell phone radiation because they didn't have to develop it, right? Like all of those things that they came up with were novel technologies at that point. And so, use that kind of like, I don't know, right leaning conservative temperament in what are we really trying to do here? But if you want to get through whatever we're facing now, you're going to have to do something that, your ancestors never heard of because
Right.
what you're facing, they had never heard of either.
Yeah. And it's increasing more and more by the day, the gap between us and our ancestors. But
Of course. And like I said, if you want to, what people need, they need to find what they actually want to achieve, right? Your life's achievement should not be diet. Your life's achievement should be things that your diet supports, that makes you healthier and happier and stronger, that gives you, better descendants, right? Healthier children that you are strong enough to take care of, that you're creative enough and driven enough to support them and teach them things and give them this incredible world to then, go to the future because it's your ancestors did what they could for you,
Mhm.
right? Not necessarily for them in that moment, but it's all part of this thing here. And so it doesn't stop with us. So using that kind of idea, think about what it is you actually want to accomplish because versus one diet necessarily, I mean, I do think there are such things as bad diets, but a lot of things are just trade-offs. And so if you're like at a fork in the road and you want to go left and you're right, it's not always like that meme where it's like the dark, scary thing with the trees that have no no leaves, and then like
Mhm.
the sunshine in the castle. Sometimes it's just this castle and that castle, and the only preference is like what your own flair or interest is. And
Yeah.
so if you don't make a delineation and choice between, I prefer that versus that, you don't know whether to go left or right.
So I really like the way you put that. Your diet really should inform and align with what you want your legacy to be. And yeah, sometimes you don't know which way to go or where to start. And I mean, look at yourself and kind of the journey you've been on. Sometimes you need to go down some other paths and then kind of turn around. And that's not necessarily a bad experience or wasted experience. That was valuable, and you've learned from it, and you're informing others too. And it's just a part. I mean, it's a part of who you are. So I think that's really important and really cool. I do want to go to the bonus show, but before I do that, can you provide your um, you know links and your podcast where people can find that? Of course, they can find it wherever podcasts are found, I assume. But anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's it right now. Some things I'm working on, but whatever's out there, you can follow me on any social media at Josh Rayner Gold, and my podcast is called Rayner Radio. Rayner is spelled Rainer. So yeah, that's on Spotify, Apple, whatever. And then I'm also on Rumble. I'm on YouTube as well, but my episode got taken down because we talked about the vaccine. um, too much, a lot. The whole episode was about that. So
Well, that
YouTube,
that you're talking that was the episode with the guy who helped to make the Died Suddenly documentary, right?
yes, yeah. So that
Okay,
got
yeah,
pulled down within like hours. So I will post future episodes on YouTube. I probably won't make it on YouTube very long. But it's on Rumble, and yeah, I'll probably I need to get it on BitChute and stuff too.
yeah.
But pretty much everything. If you follow me I'm most active on Twitter. You can kind of stay updated on where things are there.
All right, Joshua Rayner, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, John.
All right, everybody, thank you for listening to today's episode with Joshua Rayner. I know you enjoyed it because you're still listening now. And if you want to listen to more of this conversation, then you should go join the Lions of Liberty Pride. Or if you're in the Pride, you should just go listen to the 35 minutes of bonus interview that I did with Joshua today. So you can join the Pride by going to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty or lionsofliberty.locals.com. Be sure to do that, and you can hear the rest of this awesome interview. Of course, we have other perks if you join the Pride. If you listened to our show last Friday, Meme Wars, you heard an ad for Tyler Colford, longtime supporter of our show. At the $100 per month and up level in the Pride, you actually can, plug yourself, plug a business, plug a project you're working on one of our shows throughout the week, and we'll help you get the word out for something that you're passionate about. So awesome stuff. And hopefully you all have a great week this week. And next week, I'm really not sure what my show is going to be. I have a couple of different guests that I might be a guest next week, but honestly, I have a lot of things that have been cooking in the old noggin that I think I need to rant about a little bit. So we might do a solo episode next week and get some things off my chest, we'll see how that goes. But whatever happens, I'll see you all next week. And always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.